is not hope, hope.
Hello, everyone. Just kind of got sidetracked already. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Just making some new beats as usual. This might be my last beat in this series. I want to put this stuff together into one mix, so I want to take some time to organize that mix into an entire cohesive set. This is kind of like the last in the recorded sample voice combo thing. Although I probably will do more of those in the future. Just kind of like want to keep this as its own entity. I have a lot of stuff to work on actually. Besides this, I have like some compositions and other things, so there will be plenty of music to come.
Hope is not just for the future.
Yeah, I'm just kind of working out the beat first. Trying to find some way of making the instrument a little bit more interesting. This is a synth sample from my OB6. So just to elaborate on what's happening here, I have a kick, I have a synth, kind of want to slow it down. I don't know, there's something nice about that attack that sounds better if you're a little faster. Now this section, this track is my favorite right now because it's something I've been using lately. Not the sample itself, but the way I'm using the sample, which is to slice it into 32 slices. Set up an LFO that triggers each sample in time. So I synchronize the LFO's speed with the length of the pattern. And then I end up with a sliced up version of this. You can kind of hear it. And then I mapped a scene to lengthen that. I want to copy that scene over to another scene and build on that idea by adjusting the speed of the LFO. And that will start to make the LFO trigger different slices than the ones in sequence. was also thinking of one way to elaborate on this idea by just kind of letting the length of the release of the sample kind of guide itself via an LFO. So I'm going to try that out right now. Basically, I have this LFO synced to the pattern. You hear that? It gets longer at the end. Now if I double that, you'll start to hear it. Now if I make that speed a little bit less regular, still kind of not married to that that synth sample. I'm trying to use all of these by the end. I think what I want this to do actually is to move up as the beat extends. So So then I also have my track 7 through machine here. Let me just check out this stream real quick. Ever use backing track played on Octa? Yeah, I do. Actually, that was where I kind of started with that. Yeah, exactly. So the LFO is out of phase with the, I mean, you could say out of phase. Basically, it's out of sync with the cycle of the pattern. So essentially, as I slow it down, it doesn't repeat exactly when the pattern repeats. But since it's set to trig sync trig, that means it's synchronized to restart at the beginning of the sequence. So if I have this, if I have the scale of this track at like 4 bars, then it will only repeat the LFO. It'll start the LFO at the end of those 4 bars. If I have it set to a single bar, it'll repeat that LFO at the beginning of that single bar every time. It doesn't listen to the master. In other words, it doesn't listen to the master sequence length. It listens to the individual track length, which can be set individually if you have scale mode set to per track. Right now, the way I have it set up is that it is in fact synced up with the pattern. I have it set up so that it's repeating at the end of every bar. But the reason I have it set to 2 bars is because I want to be able to move this crossfader and have the LFO that's adjusting the start point, have that be still only repeating every 2 bars, because that gives me a bit more variation. If I if I'm playing with it live and I hear it over 2 bars rather than hear it repeat every bar. So you start to get used to what that sounds like. You know, it's like, it's every 2 bars. If I had it set up this way, and in my mind, I guess what that actually means in my head is that I've decided to do it that way so that I can create 2 bar breaks, essentially. Or I've decided to make it possible to have a break start at the pickup as opposed to doing it on the second bar. Could have a more impactful sound as the thing, but I think I'll just let it be. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, well, maybe it's clear what I'm trying to do. Maybe it's not. I'm trying to create this bass line, and I think the easiest way I'm going to do it is just by choosing a note and playing the melody with it. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that. Where is that? Yeah, let's just use that from last time. Tune it down an octave by changing the rate. Move it up 4 steps. Make it last forever. Loop it. Yeah, cool. So I have like a slowly evolving idea of how I want this to unfold. Do 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then skip. Kind of wish I could hear it better. Bass. Okay. So, copy this distortion over to block 1 because I want reverb on it. Okay, I'm feeling better. Still feel less good about the way that these breaks are sounding. I feel like maybe it's the sample itself. I think I might try a sample that's closer to the tempo just so I can get more information out of it. I feel like even though I slowed it down by half, I'm losing some of that momentum because it's at a tempo that's so much slower. So even if I do slow it down by half, it seems like it's not filling in that space in a very satisfying way. So let me try some other ones. These are not, are they? No. Kind of into that. think I'm going to speed this up or slow it down rather. Slow down the LFO of the release by half. Yeah. It starts short. Yeah, I guess like one thing you could say about this, if you were trying to understand how to make something productive or create a productive thought from that long amount of just exploring random LFOs, is that I'm kind of just like planning in my mind how the beat will sound and how I can interact with it in a way that has the best average outcome. And it's, in practice, it's a lot more romantic than I'm describing it as. It's like, in other words, you kind of got like the sci-fi Star Wars where it's like, let me say all these crazy sci-fi words and then let me just like use this very basic analogy. But it's basically like, I know that I want to do this at the end of a pattern. How do I program this so that it's the most exciting version of itself? Like, for example, I mean, you could start with something really dumb like, well, pitching it down probably isn't going to do what I want it to do. It's not going to make it sound more exciting. You know, so that has a pretty low rate of success for working in like a live set. In this situation, I'm creating a pattern that sounds exciting. It changes over 2 bars. And then I'm adjusting the LFO, but I'm not adjusting the length anymore. So like the beginning of, well, I guess I can, but I won't, because I'm always pulling this at the end of a pattern anyway, or at the end of the 2-bar sequence. So there's no need to really attach release to this, because if I have it built into the way the LFO is playing, I can just kind of like think more closely about how it's affecting the start point of the track. If I'm worried about how the release is being affected, it might change the way I use the crossfader. So in this case, kind of frees that up a little bit so I can move left and right. And basically all I'm changing is the start point that it's triggering. And if you were to kind of like break that down into some like set uses, you could just kind of listen to this over and over again and be like, how do I get comfortable with this experience? Like maybe it sounds like, from what I've been doing for the last like couple weeks, having a system like this where the crossfader is adjusting the speed of an LFO, which is triggering slice points, is the best way to use that is to move this like in the second half of the sequence and keep it on, on this section. Although, hold on. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 'Cause I was just comparing this to a previous sequence that I had, which was similar, but doesn't quite use release the same way. Like, I think I've been inspired by a lot of like ski mask sounding stuff, if anyone's familiar with ski mask. There's a particular track I'm thinking of called Rev 87 or something. I'll play it in a second. And it kind of has this really like choppy drum beat, and I was like, it sounds kind of like something you could do in an octa track. Yeah, and so this has kind of been like refined over time. So going back to what I was saying earlier, I like doing this in the second half of the sequence because typically I'm finding that you want the first half of the sequence to be like something that people are familiar with, something that people can latch onto. And so having it play over and over again, I'm like, okay, I know where I want to change this. I want to change it on the back half so that it kind of like, and then you would keep it static for a while. And that gives you a very clear role of when this crossfader is used. All I'm doing, speeding up and slowing down the movement of the LFO as it chooses which slice is being played by each of these triggers. If the LFO wasn't happening, and a lot of people have probably seen this if they've been watching these, if the LFO wasn't happening, you just get the same slice over and over again. And as you increase the depth, you get more options. I think also another reason why I've been using the crossfader this way is because I was never really that satisfied with the idea of programming breaks the way that the Octatrack manual tells you to. It's very much like, let me program trigs into this. So with the Octatrack, you can select a trig, you can press right, and one of the conditions is like, it's not break, it's like, is it pre? Shit, I forgot what they call it. Fill, that's what it is. So you can set it to fill or not fill, but I feel like that's just like such a confusing way to use a sequence, because it's like, I guess, I mean, like, it's cool if it's part of like the mechanic that you work with. For me, I prefer to use like 1 out of 2, 2 out of 2. I like to use percentages. I like to use first and not first, like I've mentioned before. But when it comes to breaks, it just feels kind of like unintuitive for me to like press another command and then have a bunch of breaks happen across the pattern. I feel like it's more fun to be involved in that. Because like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like if I do a fill that way and I do pattern sequences that way, then all I'm doing is just like deciding when it switches to something else. It's just another way of having a sequence, essentially. And I feel like that's not as exciting as using the crossfader. Like, using the crossfader is easily the most fun thing you can do on the Octatrack. So it's been a tricky process to figure out how to do it so that over the course of like a 2-hour set, you don't get confused about what the crossfader does, and you're using it enough that you feel like you're involved in the performance. So for me, it's been helpful to map it onto things that are a little bit more risky, like choosing the slice point, and yet are less risky because there are a lot of boundaries as to like what happens with that situation. Just to recap, the boundary here is I'm doing it on the second half. The kind of the reason it works successfully is that it's kind of just like a random selection of beats that are still within, you know, the sound bank of this sample. So it's not going to sound like, you know, some crazy ass random thing that nobody is expecting. It's still going to sound like the beat. And, you know, it's funny because I'm moving this around a lot, but I actually have no clue what's going to happen most of the time. If I got, like, one of the things that I really like about it, though, is if I hear something that I do like, if I move it here, it seems like after the first eighth note of the second beat, I can move this to the middle, and it'll create some kind of cool break, and I don't actually have to move it all that much. And because this wave, this LFO wave, is mapped to a very specific wave shape and not like set to random or something, I can recreate that experience more or less. Like, obviously, I'll probably be off a little bit, but it encourages me to do the same thing if I liked it. Like, like if I move this to random, for example, like, it kind of just means that no matter where I put this, I don't have any control over how it sounds. It's literally random. So I don't really like that as much. I prefer something like this where it is a wave, so that if I do find a setting I like, I'm encouraged to repeat that behavior. Yeah, let's see how it sounds at the very end. So maybe, over time as I practice this, just like, something as simple as this single track, over time as I practice the use of this, I start to learn certain moves that sound a certain way. And so then I start alternating them. Maybe, every second time I'll go all the way, and then maybe every fourth time I'll wait until, I'll wait an eighth rest and then move it to the middle. I'll demonstrate that now. Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty repeatable, it's performative. You're doing something specific. You're learning how this works within the framework of the beat that you've designed. And it adds some excitement, it's like, you don't know how it's going to sound exactly. It might sound slightly different, but it's still not going to sound bad, I haven't come across, earlier in this video, I was struggling with that because I was noticing with the other sample, I can't remember, I think it was this sample. This is from a different track that I was working on. I just used this sample for this track too. And there was something off about the way it was handling the crossfader usage. So I just went ahead and said, like, that's not going to work for this track. It's probably because that sample is like 145 BPM and this is 124. So I went with a different sample that had more information to give if it is played at this tempo. And there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Like, you can set multiple scenes. Like maybe in this case, remembering that that our start point is defaulted to the middle of the slices available. Maybe we adjust the depth down to 16 instead of 32. And what ends up happening there, you'll just pay attention to this lower section that indicates how many slices we have. Yeah, so this scene is equally indescribable, to somebody, but I mean, essentially what it's doing is it's giving you less information to choose from, and so then you're getting a lot more repeats. So, I mean, call that what you will from a compositional standpoint. It's like it creates a different effect, and like each of those things, that's the reason why I don't use a ton of scenes, because if I'm going to create a scene that's based mostly on some kind of performance aspect of things, I don't want to make it so complicated that it either sounds bad more often than it sounds good, or that it's so confusing that honestly, pretty much just point A. It's like the number one priority is to make sure that it'll sound good more often than it sounds bad when you do this. So yeah, I find, for example, that, doing the depth thing less interesting, right? So I like to have it keep the same depth, which is basically allowing you to choose from all the slices, and then also considered the idea of using a scene to reduce the depth all the way to 0 and move the start point all the way to 32. The only issue, though, is that I can only choose between 17 and 32 because it has to stay defaulted to 17 unless you want this to be off. Because basically what this allows you to do is it turns... I mean, what I was hoping would be that if I move this, then it's starting to choose specific slices, but that's not actually what it does because it's, you know, gradually reducing the depth. So it's kind of just a more confusing version of doing the scene that I just designed. Yeah, because I thought it might be interesting to have, I mean, I guess I'm just going to save this part real quick and show a different thing that you could do. You could have your LFO be off. You could have the start point start at 1 and keeping that same scene that kind of just lets you choose between start point 1 and 32. Right? So like, it's just a different way of using the motion of the of the crossfader to affect the start point. But this is just way more involved, right? So not as big a fan of that. I definitely prefer the idea that your scene A is like a solid, like, this is going to sound good no matter what. And then your scene B is then something where it adds some kind of flair to the track. And by the way, if you do it this way, just the timing of when you move the crossfader, like, don't even, like, without even considering, like, leaving it in the middle, say you just move this from A to B, depending on when you choose to do that, it completely changes the rhythm of the pattern. Yeah, so I would say play around with that. See what happens. I forgot I'm not in the middle of a lesson. I'm just kind of like making this beat at the same time. Moving on. Oh shit.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. Hope.
Nope.
We need that. Hope. We need. Hope is not just for the future. Hope is not just for the future. Hope is not just for the future.
I'm worried that I used this bass line on a previous track within the same set.
Hope is not just for
I've also just been using a lot of this drum and this sort of like breakbeat type stuff.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing. We need that
Yeah. Just kind of interested in... I'm going to play Ski Mask for a second. Just to clear my head a little bit. Just a second, sorry. Cool. So this song is called 50 Euro to Break Boost. And I'll send a link on the comments. Actually, this is one example, but I was thinking of a different one. I mean, a lot of kind of like Aphex Twin. Oh yeah, this is the one I really like. This is called Dial 274. I'll link it here. Right, so I think what I want is a more stable snare, like I was hearing in that track. Something that's like all the time. So let's try to find that. And then I also want to uproot the bass line a little bit, make it a little less predictable. These drums are from my friend Patches. Shout out to Patches. I'll link him on here too. If any of you use Ableton, and I'm sure a lot of you do, patches.zone is a really good resource for tutorials and tips regarding the Ableton, and kind of in the same vein as what I do, where it's like not necessarily like a beginner's guide so much as like a fun applications kind of thing. His production guides are super detailed and super interesting. He has like zip files of like presets or default presets for your Ableton native plugins, so that you open them up and they're like ready to go, or they're designed for you to actually use them and understand what's going on. Yeah, I think I have a better bass line.
Hope.
Three, 4, and then G. 8. Yeah, Dan. You know Dan? Sweet, yeah. I met him at the Ableton Loop conference in LA a few years ago, last year. And yeah, his stuff is amazing. Ooh, that's kind of fun. Ooh, okay. Nice. He's the guy who gave me these drum break oh, actually not these drum break samples, but he gave me some drum break samples. I have to just decide if I want that sound or not. Yeah, for sure. Actually, maybe strong triangle. kind of, it's funny because I went in a really long circle and I ended up with something pretty similar to what I had. Now I'm, you can't see this on camera, but I'm trying to push the distortion just a tiny bit so that I can get a bit more grit out of the sound. Told myself I wouldn't go so melodic. Damn it. Because just the other day, I was in this really cool place, and I kind of want to explore that more. I don't know. I think the key to another key is to just not have so many expectations on what you think is going to happen. Because it will make you think that stuff that is actually good isn't that good. Yeah, I kind of have like this vendetta against like harmony because it's something that I go to a lot to make things sound good. I mean, it's like a time-honored tradition. But I've been doing it my whole life, and I started in classical piano, and actually sounded kind of cool slow. Oh, shit. Right. The thing I don't like about having a snare be separate is that it's playing even when I'm trying to do my break. My fill, sorry, which makes it sound a lot less exciting. So like, check this out. Yeah, if only there was some way to silence it the moment I move this. There is one, but I don't think I'm going to like it. But I'll show you in case you want to try it. If you set the delay to lock, if you give it a delay and you set it to lock, and you set the send to 0, that means that anything over this half will mute. And you would want to like set the time to 1 or something so you can't hear it. Another way you can do it, actually, these are just weird ways you can get around using the crossfader, like in different ways. So like maybe I set You know what? I'm not even gonna bother with that. I think it's not really enough for me to want to keep this track actually, because the fill thing is more important to me.
Into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more loving, softer. Hope is not just for the future, it's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more loving, softer. Hope is not.
Yeah, honestly, I think I just like this track without so many notes. Kind of annoyed with the notes. What do I want? I have these crazy, I think they're, is it the no, it's not the modular down tempo. It's this cymatics organic percussion thing that all of these are so crazy. Oh, it's on the wrong slice. Never play too many notes. That's what Miles Davis said, right? It's all about the notes you don't play. It's also like, it's also for me, it's like I'm trying to figure out how to make the recordings sound the most interesting. And I refuse to believe that it's the recording's fault. At least that's the game I'm playing right now. There was somebody who said they didn't like the recording from like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. They felt like they were being distracted by it. And I was kind of just like, well, I mean, you can get distracted by pretty much any part of a song. And so my goal as a creator is to just like take one thing and be like, I'm not going to change anything about. There's certain rules about it. Like, I can change the way it sounds. I can change the quality of the sound, but I can't change the words themselves, or, I can't ask them to do it again. And so that's kind of like the immovable object in all of this. Like I had my own voice recently in here for this track. And I was able to come up with something a little less serious for my own voice. I think because I noticed that I sounded very serious, so I was trying to make it a little bit different from that. With something like this, I guess I could just expound on what I'm thinking about. It's like the recording is equally serious, but the difference is that I can't really do something silly with it because I don't know this person that well. So I can't really like make it into a joke thing. I kind of have to make it serious, but I also have to use the recording. So
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present.
I mean, that was kind of cool too, though. And all because I slowed it down.
Hope is not.
I mean, shit. It's actually, there's a part of me that thinks that's more interesting than what I was working on. But I can always just turn it up. We'll play with it for a while.
Is not just hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present.
Like, there's one version of this that's like kind of fast and shuffly and something I've already done. Then there's another version that's 72 BPM and it's so slow that you're like, this has to be intentional.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present.
And then this is a place where I would actually want to use that Jimi Hendrix thing I was looking at, Hendrix fuzz.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present.
Actually, no. YouTube blocked the links.
Hope is not just for the future.
Those damn oppressors. Continuing to keep us from having fun.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present.
They blocked like the patches link and the YouTube link? It's kind of weird. It's not like that was illegal.
Hope is not just for
Oh,
the
did they block
future.
your link, Nick? The one that was like the library link, which is also legal according to the Library of Congress. Oh, I don't think it came through on your end.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. Hope is not just for the
Shit.
future. It's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more. We need that.
Okay. I'm actually enjoying the way this beat sounds against her voice more than I did the other one. Not so into the rhythmic kind of beating that's going on in this other section. I feel like I want something weirder. I do have this, if people are familiar with it, I have this sound pack from, what are they called? From Ultra Magic, which is Jimmy Edgar's label. There is analog heat on this mix. Oh shit, okay. I should just use that. Ooh. Okay, so I'm just gonna replace this with some of that. I'm surprised. Yeah, okay, so I think what happened is I need to approve it or something, because let me just go to my YouTube and see if I can approve it. Because I noticed that sometimes when somebody leaves comments, it'll be like, do you approve this comment? So that like people aren't spamming or something like that. So it's not like an ad. Huh. Nope, I don't actually see... I don't see even like any sign that that you posted anything.
Hope is not just for the
Another thing that I've been kind of slowly working into my setup, and you've probably heard me talk about this before if you've been here before, is figuring out where to perform. Obviously, I was just talking about that with regards to the crossfader, but I'm also talking about like what to do with the OP1, and also what to do with the vocals. So I think maybe last week or so I was talking about debating whether I should use my own hands to play the slices of each sample or just have them programmed into the Octatrack. And I've decided to put all of the pre-programmed stuff in here and have the samples trigger themselves so that I can focus on something like the Octatrack. So I can focus on something like the OP1 and the crossfader to affect the performance. Because I feel like in a lot of ways, what I've been playing for the last like week or two is just the skeleton of the track, and the track gets better and better as I become more familiar with how I've designed it. Once I become comfortable enough with the structure of it that I can play it very comfortably, then I can expand on it using the OP1. I can choose which patches are in the OP1 that will work best with the songs. And that gives me an additional level of play that, if I was working on, using the crossfader, triggering the vocal samples, eventually you just get overwhelmed by all of the things that you have to do, and you can't play around. So my approach has always been, or has been increasingly in this, in this time of like concentrated rehearsal, my approach has been to take care of the bandwidth that I have. I think I referred to it like many videos ago as mental CPU. And now I call it bandwidth because that feels more apt. It's like, if I'm going to spend, like, what am I going to spend? What are you going to spend your bandwidth on? Like, are you going to spend it on, having a bunch of patterns that you personalize and you go, any one of these could be, the next section, and you can kind of jump around? Are you going to make it linear? In my case, I've chosen to organize my songs very separately, have them play linearly from 1 to, however many. I never have to go more than, 16 for a single song. So I have a pretty clear sense of where everything is. I have, 9, I think I have more than 9 tracks because I have them sometimes. Like Bank 7 has 2 different tracks, but they're very clear because there's a gap between them. So I have an idea of how I can sequence the songs. And then as for the performance of the song, it's pretty straightforward. I've kind of designed it so that if I forget to move on to the next section, it won't ruin the track. It'll just make the track longer. And that's where, having the vocal samples trigger per pattern and having them stop at a certain point, that's where that really pays off, because, then I can just go into an instrumental section. If I forget, I can just go into an instrumental section and just kind of play around with the OP1, and then I can, move to the next pattern. But kind of the key for my setup is I'm programming the song to work on a certain level. No matter what I do, at worst, it just gets longer, or it starts to repeat a little bit. But I will never be confused as to what I'm supposed to do next. Like, if I'm playing, pattern 1, I know this is an intro section, so there's not going to be a vocal. And then pattern 2 is where the vocal is going to come in.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more loving, softer.
Yeah, so everything just moves left to right in this case. And the hope is that once I finish these, I think this will probably be the last one, once I finish that, I'm going to record performances of each one individually. I already had one example, which was the poem called Here, which I posted a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to have versions of those basically for each of the tracks that I've made here. And those are not final versions either. Basically, all I'm going to do is use them so that I can, share them with you and share them online, but also use them so that I can put them into Ableton and arrange them visually and see how they configure best. I could also do it in the Octatrack, but I'm thinking that it will take a little too much time if I do it that way. And I would rather just have it all visually in front of me so I can drag it around. And then once I do solidify, one version of the set, then I can either rearrange the banks by renaming them in the file manager, or I can just at least write down on a note card, like bank 1 goes first, then bank 7, then bank 3, and bank 5. Because I didn't write these songs with the intention of playing it 1 through 9 or 1 through 13. I wrote them just individually, and so now when I want to hear them work as a set, I would rather have the waveforms on hand and just drag them around, crossfade them, see where certain tracks work together, and then slowly I can work out the ideal set, at least for now. Kick Cat says, another methodology question. Do you take separate notes on your sets to remember what all happens, or do you tend to set things up so you don't have to remember? Yes, I do set things up so I don't have to remember. Most of the time, I don't want to take too many notes because I feel like the note-taking game never ends. And I also have too many projects to have one set of notes work effectively. So usually what I do is, I devised a system that I've been testing out. The first step to that system is find a way that you can use a single project for more tracks. And the way that I found, so the reason why I wanted to do that was because making a new project often requires you to redo all of your personal preferences, and you might end up forgetting certain things that made your last project really convenient. So there's also, obviously saving as new and all of that, but if you save as new, you can create a new project using the same, using the spot that you're at right now as a checkpoint. But I find, I think that's a definitely a useful way to go about it. But I think just accepting that I will use one project for multiple tracks has changed the way I think about writing the song, and actually emphasized performance, and emphasized getting it right this time or optimizing this time. If in the past I would have 10 different projects with 10 different songs, and each project was slightly different because the changes didn't necessarily carry over. Maybe I would find something that slightly worked better on the next project, and then I would keep that. But then when I revisited the old project, there would be old things about it that I would start to have to keep multiple configurations of the Octatrack in my mind. And so I decided that it would be a really helpful thing to consolidate my work with the Octatrack into a single project, so that anytime there's a set of scenes that I really like, I can go to it immediately. It's not like, I do feel like changing projects, especially now that I'm using one project from day to day, changing projects is kind of an ordeal. It takes some time to load. You kind of have to get, situated and figure out what's going on, especially if, each of your projects is a different song and you've configured it a different way. So it's not like you can't make more projects. It's just if you can simplify your projects down and make it so that they hold more each, then I think all of your projects will benefit from that change, because they'll start to resemble each other in how you approach the crossfader or how you approach parts, and you'll get a better sense of the pros and cons of doing them a certain way. So that's one way that I like reduce the need for notes. Another way that I do that is by creating a system that I don't have to keep on a piece of paper. So like I have the song set up via Banks, and it used to be really confusing to me to go into the audio pool and just be like, did I use this file, or what is this file, used for? Because I don't reuse a ton of these, unfortunately, except for like some of the first ones that are like chains and kicks and stuff. It helps me to know like what these files are connected to. And so I found the easiest way to do that was to set up, was to create my own system internally, where essentially bank one uses samples 11 through 20, bank 2 uses samples 21 through 30, bank 3 uses 31 through 40, and so on. So like you'll notice there's like pockets of files throughout, and this just helps me see exactly where these files will be used. Like I've been working on bank 9 today, so these are the 3 files I added for bank 9. And that's helpful too, because then when I go into the arranger, everything is telling me the same information. Like I can check, which files I should be looking at just by holding bank. And I'm like, okay, this is 90 through 100. This is 80 through 90, 70 through 80. And yeah, so I don't use a ton of scenes. And when I did use scenes, which was like a few months ago for performance, I had the same set of scenes, no matter what I was performing, because I wanted to get a sense of like what was happening without having to refer to a piece of paper. So I created a system where like filters here, reverbs here, delays here. There's like 3 different delays, and there's like some distortion stuff, and then there was some like timing based stuff where I adjusted the rate. But I find that that's the best way to get creative with the Octatrack is get as quickly as you can to a point where you're just kind of doing it by muscle memory, or you've created a system. It's not going to just happen one day, because everything like represents too much. Like every knob has multiple functions. The crossfader can do an infinite number of things. So I find that the easiest way is to simplify each of these elements to a particular role. Like I was talking about with like these drum breaks, where in this particular case, I'm using it to like create some kind of a drum fill when I move this. It all has to do with familiarity. If it's hard to remember, especially if you're not like super used to using the Octatrack, I don't think there's anything wrong with, writing stuff down. But I think the eventual goal should get to a point where I think you should ask yourself if this is something that I intend to remember one day, or if this is something that is like an aid to me performing. Because I'm of the opinion that the ideal performance, you would not have to refer to a note or something like that.
Hope is not.
That said, when I use arrangements, I do add some little notes here and there in the arrangement. So like I'll have like, say I'll add a reminder thing, and then I'll say like the name of the song. That's usually as far as I'll go. Like back when I was performing with a handful of different people, I would have an arrangement for each of their sets, and then within each one I would have like, oh, the song is called this, the song is called this, so that I could keep track of like where I was in the set. But apart from that, I don't really keep notes on like performance stuff.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something.
This is a poem called...
Oops. Oh, yeah. It's because I had arrangement on. Shit.
Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our present. We need that spark of imagination to breathe life into our creation. Together, we're birthing something more equitable, kinder, more loving, softer. Hope is not just for the future. Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our past. We must remember our victories. Hope is not just for the future. Hope is not just hope is not just for hope is not just for the future. It's also for our past. We must remember our victories and cherish our histories. Hope is not just for the future. It's also for our past. We must remember, hope is not just for the future. It's also for our past. We must remember our victories and cherish.
I guess I'm still feeling kind of iffy about this whole thing. I think I'm just going to take a break for the day and come back to this on Wednesday. I hope this was informative all the same. Just kind of like working out some things. I think the reason why I want to start ending this project is partly because I'm starting to feel the tug of other styles of music. I've been listening to more techno, and I want to make more techno style things. And I also want to have enough time to actually process all of the things that are in this project. I'm running out of CPU space, or sorry, I don't even know what this is called. Maybe RAM. Yeah, I'm running out of RAM on this project. And so there's all these kind of like little things, little signs that are telling me that it's time to move on. So yeah, I'll just work on this on Wednesday. But thanks again for watching. And I'll see you Wednesday afternoon. Have a good rest of your day, y'all.